hello, builders of good. Thank you for tuning in to the Build Good Fundraising podcast. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So, on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money. Now, on every episode, we coach you to build your fundraising like a flywheel. The flywheel has 5 steps. Number 1 is listening to donors. Number 2 is engaging them in meaningful ways. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating every single gift at every single level. And number 5 is reporting back in a real-time and responsive way. If you master the 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably with less effort on your part. Your revenue will grow, but so will your career. Now, every week, we focus on one part of the flywheel. And this week, we are focusing on listening to donors. And we're talking to Anton Lipkanou. He's the president of Delve Deeper, our performance media agency that works with some of the biggest brands in the nonprofit space. These are organizations that you would have heard of. Their names will be familiar to you. Now, him and his team recently published the 2025 Digital Fundraising Report that outlines some trends, some challenges, and some approaches to acquiring, retaining, and growing individual mass donors through online advertising. Now, it's the most comprehensive report that I've seen in our sector, and that's why I've asked Anton to come on. Now, in today's conversation, we're going to get into what he calls the collapsing donor pyramid. We're going to get into how one of the best ways to respond to the collapse is for nonprofits to do a better job of listening to donors so they can personalize the donor journey and the donor experience in order to treat every donor like you might a major donor that you have a very personal relationship with. We're also getting into some of the ways Anton and his team are thinking about AI and using AI to listen to donors. It's a wide-ranging conversation. I think you're going to get a ton of value out of it. So here's my conversation with Anton Lipkanou. Anton, thanks for making the time today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Mike.
Let's get right into it. In the US and in Canada, as well as like Australia and UK and New Zealand and some of those markets, the trends are largely the same, like the macro trends. There's these red blinking lights on all of our dashboards that are basically saying like individual giving seems to be under threat. That might sound a little alarmist, but it is happening. It might be happening slowly, but it will happen quickly at one point if we don't do something about it. Now, many organizations are sitting on donor files where donors are still being very generous, but donors are beginning to age out. And overall philanthropic revenue is growing, but we're not growing actually the share of wallet. And we're relying on fewer and fewer people to do more and more of the giving. So it can be easy to look at the trends and be like, oh, well, philanthropic revenue is growing. That is true, but it's fewer people doing more of the giving, which is a problem. Now, you call this the collapsing of the giving pyramid. And so just to frame up our conversation today, to kind of tee it up, can you start by painting us a picture? What does the collapse of the giving pyramid look like?
Yeah, and we were probably being too dramatic there, and it's purposely so and I've been in the nonprofit space for not that long, right? And Delve Deeper started as a performance media agency in the for-profit world. And we got into the nonprofit to an extent by accident, and we really got close to the sector. I personally got very close to the sector. I love the sector. And then we started noticing some trends, right? And we talk about them, and ultimately it all comes to that collapse in the given pyramid. But the first thing we noticed, and the first stat that gave the birth to the report that you read, was when I was looking at the data from one of the clients, and I was looking at the age of the donor 7 or 8 years ago, and the age of the donor today. And what stood out to me is the age of the donor today, the average age, was 7.2 years older than it was 7 years ago. And at first it didn't make much sense to me. But then I started looking into it more, and what I realized is in 7 years, the donors, the average donors of this organization, aged faster than the time that actually passed. Meaning we acquired, not only we didn't acquire younger donors, we kept acquiring even older donors, feeding into this flywheel, using your words, that I see as a snowball in the industry. And then we started digging, right? We started working with our partners, we started looking at the trends, we started working with the industry. And the more we've dug, the more I've seen the same trend over and over again. And kind of comes down to two numbers where the total revenue in the sector is going like this. And for those who's listening to us, I'm showing uptrend with my hand. But the count of donors is going in the opposite direction. The count of donors is decreasing. And we as a sector look at the revenue and, oh, we're doing awesome. We're raising more money year on year. I won't even get into how does it look like inflation adjusted. It doesn't matter. What matters is we are raising more money, but we are raising more and more money from fewer and fewer donors. And when we talk about the collapse of the given, it's as simple as if I map out this trend over the next 5, 10, 15 years, at some point it comes to an end. At some point it hits a wall where I don't have more money to fund the organization. I don't have more money to fund the operations of the organization I'm working for. And what leads to that is this recreation of what used to be the given pyramid. Now I'm asking, encouraging, daring sometimes our clients to look at this as the given Eiffel Tower, because it's not a pyramid. It's an Eiffel Tower today, and it's only getting worse unless we do something about it.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar with the terminology of a giving pyramid, can you quickly just walk us through what would a traditional giving pyramid look like, and then why has it become an Eiffel Tower? How is that imagery changing?
Sure thing. A traditional given pyramid is what they call it in English, the right triangle, the triangle with all three sides being equal, where we have a sturdy, wide base, and at the base we have a lot of small value donors. And some of these donors progress up through the pyramid and they become recurring givers, they become monthly, they become legacy donors. Some of them become major donors if they're lucky enough to hit a tailwind in their careers and have enough money to do that. And what happens over time is due to natural cycles, some of the major donors are leaving the pyramid, usually due to natural causes, but more of the donors are added at the bottom and more of the donors are moving up the pyramid, and it essentially compensates for itself over time. And if I take snapshots of, say, average age of that throughout the years, that average age would be the same in a pyramid that is not improving, but also not getting worse. If it was 65 years, for example, 5 years ago, it should be 65 years today. That's, call it a balanced giving pyramid. Now, what I call the Eiffel Tower is the pyramid where the base got narrower, just how the beautiful Eiffel Tower in Paris looks like. And the top of it is getting more squeezed, it gets longer in relation to the rest of the pyramid. So the weight of the top, the relative weight of those fewer major donors is becoming so much larger compared to the rest of the pyramid.
Yeah. Now, is that a function of demographics having changed and just like the wealth gap growing anyways? And so there's an argument of like, well, yeah, fewer people are um, holding more of the wealth, and so maybe it's a reflection of that. Or is there something else, or is there something else going on here? Um, what's what's behind the collapse?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wondered the same when we first started looking at the data. And Of course, there is a part of the natural demographic change. I mean, we know that the fastest growing demographics today, at least in the North America, is the billionaire class and the ultra wealthy. So partially that makes sense, but one number that essentially busts that hypothesis for me is when we look at the outflow of donors by the age group, that decrease in the number, percentage-wise, relative decrease of younger donors is even larger than it is for older donors. In other words, if 2 years ago I have 50 donors total, 10 Gen Z, 10 millennials, 10 Gen X, 10 boomers, 10 silent generation, I might have lost two of the boomers and two of the silent
Mhm.
generation since then, but I probably lost three millennials, if not four, and three Gen Zers. And that number is what scared me even more than just the relative increase of the top. The decrease of the bottom is worse than the increase in the top.
Yeah. So we're losing, if I'm hearing you correctly, we are, relatively speaking, comparatively speaking, we're not only losing more people who are coming into organizations at a lower first gift, so lower value, but we're also losing donors who are essentially below the age of 65 and younger. Is that accurate? We're both not building a larger broader base of like younger people like below 65, but also we're not building a broader base in general of people who are coming in at those lower value gifts.
You're right. Not only we don't drive more donors, we actually lose some. And back to this annual statistic, which was repeating itself for the last several years, the total count of people donating to the entire sector is decreasing. Despite the revenue increasing, the total count of people is decreasing. And
Hmm.
that's especially visible for the mass donors, people who usually donate less than $10,000 a year.
Yeah. So we framed up the problem here nicely, and anybody listening now is going like, "Oh, great, things sound hopeless." But of course, they're not hopeless. There are many things that are entirely within our control, and we as a sector can probably own some of these results as well. So I want to get into that. I want to move into what is something we can do about it. Your research shows that to specifically engage younger audiences is leaning more heavily into personalization across the entire donor journey. So including top of funnel, not just like donors that you get to know very well and they're with you for years and years, but including top of funnel. So the broad-based mass marketing advertising that we do. And that's where I want to camp out for a little bit because I think many revenue leaders listening to this podcast are completely there with you. Yes, we should personalize. When I log into Netflix, my Netflix homepage is completely personalized to me. My Spotify app is completely personalized to me. It would be amazing if we could start to personalize, ideally for every single person. But even if we're not thinking every single person, even if we can take some steps toward personalizing more, I would love that. I have no idea how. I know it's possible. We must have the tools by now. So before we get into the how, what does personalization mean in the work that you do in fundraising at the mass level? What does personalization look like?
Yeah, and to your point, this one-to-one marketing euphoria, I'm
Yeah.
going to call it, is something the entire sector, and here I'm talking about the digital marketing sector, not the nonprofit sector, but it's something that all of us have spoken about since the early email days. And probably before that, we had the same conversations about direct mail. So it's not new. And it's a trap that many organizations go down the rabbit hole of saying, oh, we're going to personalize our messaging for every fill in the gap customer, prospect, donor, subscriber, patient, whatever it might be. And I definitely don't want to say, oh, yes, what this sector needs to do, what our nonprofit sector needs to do is personalize for everybody. And that's the answer, and leave it at that. There is probably already enough podcasts talking about that. And to your point, like what is personalization to me? Uh, I want to tell a little story / drive a little analogy here because I've been obsessed recently with this framework of jobs to be done, right? And it's another great framework developed by Harvard Business Review, no less, back in somewhere in the 80s. And all it talks about is when I'm going to a Nike store, I'm buying those sneakers not because I need the best sole or a certain color or something. I'm buying it to solve a certain job for me. My business coach frequently talks about when you're going to an orthodontist, you are not necessarily going there for even teeth. That's a mean to get something else. Maybe it's confidence, maybe it's attractiveness, maybe it's your definition of happiness, whatever that might be for you. And it's 10x more important in sectors where there is no physical product, where all we get back from clicking that flash and donate button is mental reward. And telling a personal story there, most people have a cancer story. I have a cancer story. My father died from cancer, colon cancer in particular. He was 53. He died much younger than he should have. And when I click that donate button on whether it's American Cancer Society or Blood Cancer United or Stand Up to Cancer or F Cancer, which I'm a donor to all of them. But when I click that button, I'm thinking of him. I'm thinking of like the value I'm getting, the job I'm doing when I'm clicking that button, and the job that this organization is helping me do is I feel closer to him. And I'm hoping that probably my donation, especially now with the power of AI for finding the cure, hopefully my donation will spare the life of somebody else from having to go through what I went through, and maybe it will save their father and they will have 10 years more together. I know I would love that. Now, most of those cancer organizations are not talking to me about that. They're talking to me same as they're talking to somebody who, God forbid, might have faced cancer themselves or know somebody who faces cancer right now or just read about it and felt very affiliated to it. But the job that those people are hiring this certain organization for is very different from the job I'm looking for. And I know that, just speaking for myself, if there was one org which sent an email and it told me exactly what I'm telling you now, help somebody else have 10 more years with their father, I probably would have goosebumps and I would have probably donated, I don't know, my entire paycheck to that. That is what I'm talking about, the power of personalization. And by the way, I would feel awesome donating that entire paycheck. Now, that's an extreme example, but understanding this values that I hold, understanding these values that donors hold is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about personalization. Because as a sector that does not provide any physical products, as a sector that only provides this mental relief, this mental satisfaction, this mental fulfillment, choose your word, we must do a better job of doing that.
Yeah.
And we do it really well with major donors. And for a very long time, it was indeed impractical to do that for mass donors. I mean, we can't afford to attach a given officer to every donor who has a potential to give $5 or who is given $5. At the end of the day, the mission of fundraising teams is to raise the biggest boatload of money they can raise. So that would be impractical. But we can do that today. We can do that. And to your point, you said it 5 minutes ago yourself, we must have the tools right now. We do have the tools. And I see my mission as helping organizations to use the tools available to them, to us today, I like how you said it at the beginning, to listen to donors, to listen to prospects, and to identify those unique values that they want to fulfill and help them fulfill them.
Yeah. I want to get into that practical how. I want to get into if giving is a story of self, if giving is autobiographical, how can we make sure that we're allowing a donor to step into that story and matching their values and creating the context and the space around that. You mentioned jobs to be done. It might be a new concept for some of our listeners. So before we get into the how, we'll quickly just get into jobs to be done very quickly. You already mentioned develop a Harvard Business Review, famous story of the jobs to be done lore, and there's books around this. And if any listener just wants to Google jobs to be done, it's a fantastic framework in fundraising. Famous lore around jobs to be done is the researchers who were helping McDonald's figure out what to do about their breakfast, and they just watched customers essentially in the drive-through, and customers were buying milkshakes on the way to work for breakfast. And they weren't buying some of the other breakfast options that McDonald's was trying to roll out. And what they figured out is the milkshake was fulfilling a job for the customer. They needed to get enough calories and carbs into their system to feel like they had energy before showing up at work, but they were also driving, and so they couldn't eat a messy meal or like it needed to be something like the format of the milkshake ended up being just a delivery vehicle for the nutrition that people needed on the way to work. And so you're saying if you look at jobs to be done in fundraising, our donors are essentially hiring us to do a job. And I think that is a different way of thinking about this than a lot of us show up thinking about, which is um, it's not about you, it's what they can do through you. And they're hiring you to do a very specific job, and that job is different for different people. For some people, for some people, I'm sure you've had the same on. Some people say, I don't want to be thanked. Giving is a religious obligation for me. The left hand shouldn't know what the right hand is doing. And so that's the job. That's the job to be done, which is tithing my 10% of my income to because my faith obligates me to do it. Sometimes it's about personal connection. Sometimes it's about values. Sometimes it's simply about in high pressure fundraising tactics, sometimes the job to be done is I need you to go away. Get off of my doorstep. Get alleviate a feeling of guilt. Um, and you're in the job, you're in the business, so are we, of lifetime value. And that oftentimes doesn't correlate to high lifetime value. So let's talk about giving of self. This giving being a story of self and how we can listen to donors. Our donors have stories just like yours. I gave to a diabetes charity the other day because I'm a type 1 diabetic. It literally means every 2 hours I make a life and death decision, which is do I need more insulin or do I need more carbs? If I mess up that decision, there's a real chance that I'm going to be very close to death. So I'm always balancing, right? So being a diabetic is an intensely like it's a job that I do. It's also like very much who I am. And so when I gave to this diabetic charity, they didn't ask me if I gave because I had diabetes or because somebody that I know had diabetes, or they didn't ask me if I was more interested in research about diabetes or if I was more interested in in resources about how to live with diabetes, which is the same as when you're giving experience when you gave to cancer. Do any of those organizations know why you gave to them?
And some of them do, because I'm very vocal about sharing that.
Mhm.
Uh, some of them don't because they didn't ask me, to your point. And I loved the story you shared about McDonald's. And I think it goes back for me personally. And I spent the last decade in the services industry, where I'm in professional services, which means I am in service of organizations that I serve. And nonprofits are, in a way, in service of their mission, in service of the recipients of their program services, but they're also in service of the donors. And to your point, some organizations, maybe most organizations, I don't know the exact numbers. I guess it's the most based on my experience, but let's leave it at some. Some organizations can do a better job in, yes, simply paying attention. Asking is one way to do it. Paying attention to what is the job that our donors want us to do? What is the service that we can provide to them?
And I empathize, to be clear. You just outlined a two-sided business model. So nonprofits have one set of customers, which is the people they're serving, where they're delivering clean water filters to, or doing field clinics, or whatever they do. And then they have a second set of customers, which is the donors that make a lot of that work happen. And sometimes they have three or four or five sets of customers because the donors are private people like you and I. Sometimes there's like government funding, sometimes there's different grantees. And so in my experience, organizations already know how to listen very well to stakeholders. It's just oftentimes those are the people that they're serving in the field, quote unquote. They do research, that a qualitative analysis. They interview people they're serving. They're improving their services that they're providing to the end user all the time. And I think what you and I maybe are advocating for here is adapting that same mindset when it comes to your donors and recognizing that donors too are a set of customers, just like the end user is.
100%. And I remember I used to say that nonprofit organizations are to an extent matchmakers between the donors and the causes these donors care about and the people who would benefit from that cause. It's a platform that enables that connection and it serves everybody in the process. It provides exceptional value to everybody in that process.
Mhm.
And I imagine where you want to take it next is, well, okay, how do we do that?
How do
Right?
we do
Like,
it?
what are
Yeah.
some practical examples?
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna break the ground by saying it usually starts from asking, and it starts from asking different sources of data that we have. And yes, the simplest thing is just ask the current donors, especially the mass donors. And the question I would ask our listeners to contemplate for themselves is, when was the last time that my team have spoken to our mass donors? But that's usually not enough. That's usually just a starting point, because the donors, just as me, just as you, they leave traces, they leave breadcrumbs in their digital lives that express this interest. Simple example is, what do they react to? And I know the best way to see what I care about for somebody who doesn't know me is to see which content I'm interacting with versus which content I'm not interacting with. For example, most of the organizations that we're dealing with, and I'll bring it back to the point where I think now we have the tools to do it. Historically, we didn't have to. We didn't used to have them. For example, most organizations have long histories of direct mail programs and usually email programs too. And those programs, They live somewhere in our CRM. We usually have PDFs of all the direct mail assets that we send to our donors. And they live maybe in a table in a relative database, and we have some connection to who opened it, to who clicked on it, and what ended up in a donation. And at the time, we also likely looked at metrics such as average open rate, which campaign worked better, average donation rate, average donation value, average drop-off rate from those sends, etc. All of that data is what we can use today to reverse engineer into the values, the jobs to be done that the donors already hired our organizations for. One simple use case I'm talking to the organizations I'm working with is taking as much of that as possible, taking all those PDFs, uploading them into an AI platform of your choice, whether it's ChatGPT, it's
Hmm.
Claude, it's Anthropic, whatever it might be, and asking it to categorize all these assets and attach labels to them based on the emotional buttons that they were pushing. Because they were pushing different buttons. Some of them were pushing urgency, some of them were pushing research, some of them were pushing familial connection,
Hmm.
whatever those might have been. Just use it and label it. And then once we have all those labels, go back and now look at which donors, which of those ABC 1, 2, 3 depersonalized rows in the CRM consistently responded to all the direct mail assets that were labeled as familial connection or were labeled as urgency. That is the best indicator of not only the job they would hire the organization for, but the job they already hired the organization for. And we practically couldn't have done it 5 years ago. It was impossible. It would
Hmm.
take a team of interns to sift through every one of those historic PDFs and label it, and probably also make a lot of manual mistakes in the process. We could not have done it. We can do it today. We could not have looked at all the pages that they are clicking on the website and make those little connections between, oh, they spent 7 seconds on this page, but 37 seconds on this page. We couldn't
Hmm.
do that at every donor scale. It was impractical. Now we can.
Yeah.
We couldn't use tools such as Tracker, trakkr.io, or Profound to analyze which prompts our organization is showing up for. Because not only that's what we are showing up for, but that's also what our donors are looking for. Now we can. We couldn't connect to a social listening system and analyze their Facebook behavior. Now we can. We couldn't interview, back to my first square, we couldn't interview 10, 15, 20, some manageable number of our
Hmm.
donors following the jobs to be done questioning framework, upload it all in one place and extrapolate the insights. We couldn't have done it. Now we can. We've done that for a number of our clients recently. The insights that it's given me and the accuracy of me now being able to use that to A/B test the messaging is blowing up my mind.
Hmm.
All of those things that were historically reserved just for major donors because it took a human to do it on a one-to-one basis, we now can do on a 1 to 100 basis with the help of AI in between.
Yeah. The first time we did a jobs to be done interview was 3 or 4 years ago, and it was to launch this product called the Fundraising Academy. So I talked to a bunch of fundraisers to jobs to be done for. I used Airtable, and then had at the time was like a Descript transcript or something from the conversation, but then manually created tags in Airtable for the different conversation and the different sentiments, and I thought it was like, this is amazing. I can use Airtable and I can categorize everything. Now, that seems incredibly archaic, and that was only 3 years ago. So now it would be a matter of having 15, 30, 40, 50 conversations with donors, just having Fathom or another recorder record the conversation, transcribe it, and then already do all the sentiment analysis for you, look at insights. It's an incredible assistant that we've all been given largely for free. In what other ways are you listening to donors to then inform the advertising work that you do?
Not even asking. The biggest thing, I like how you're asking the question. The biggest thing is listening to what they're already doing, right? It's analyzing their interactions with the organization and also analyzing their interactions outside of the organization. We live in a beautiful age and we live in a scary age where all this data is available. My credit card history is available, my Amazon purchase history is available, my Google search history is available. All of this is out there, which sometimes scares me as a person, sometimes still makes me excited as a marketer because I believe in marketing for the greater good of the recipient of this marketing. And a good example is we use Amazon DSP with our nonprofit clients all the time. I remember the first couple times we've done it, it always raised the eyebrows and it always raised
Hmm.
the question of it's a DSP for retail clients to see whether somebody is buying a yellow or a pink case for their AirPods. Why would I use it for my nonprofit? Years later, I'm seeing that question still, but much less so, because not only it talks about that case for the AirPods, but it also talks about which book am I buying. It talks about which posters I'm buying for my room. It talks about which brands I'm choosing versus which brands I'm not choosing, which also alleviates and leads to the values that I hold. So these breadcrumbs, they're there. And I would point back to how you asked this question because it's not about asking, it's about listening to what's already being done. And then another portion which matters vastly here, because we started this conversation by talking about personalization. But the second important piece is the feedback loop of, and then testing this and seeing if I was actually right. If I'm categorizing Mike as somebody who seems to care about the urgency and Anton as somebody who seems to care about value on research, oh, why don't I send a series of messages about urgency to Mike and the value of research to Anton and actually validate that this is working better? I cannot know without doing that, but that feedback loop of asking few, extrapolating to many, and listening to many, then personalizing, and then validating my insights, that's what we see all the time. And I guess where I'll leave it is it doesn't necessarily take tech. Tech isn't the biggest thing here, but it takes the discipline. It takes the process discipline that we as marketers, we know what it takes. We've done it in direct mail, we've done it in email for decades. It takes consistent test and control sales in your marketing plan and the cadence of testing it week over week and month over month. And yes, maybe it's not the fastest, most exciting, or what you said at the beginning, uh, easy route, but it's simple.
Yeah. Anton, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. If people want to download the report or if they just want to learn more about Delve or you, where can they find you?
Oh, please, yes, go to delve deeper, delvedeeper.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn, or reach out to Mike. He has my phone number.
Sounds good. Well, that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening to the Build Good Fundraising podcast. If you are interested in these sorts of insights, you can come to the Build Good Summit live next May 13th to 14th in downtown Toronto. At the Build Good Summit this year, Anton's team came to the summit. They also presented some of their findings. So if you're interested in doing this, being part of these sorts of conversations live, go to buildgoodsummit.com. We'd love to have you there. As always, thank you for hanging out with us around the fundraising campfire. If you're listening to this, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thanks for the work you do. I'm your host, Mike Dirksen, cheering you on as you do good in the world.